We certainly wish all of you fathers a happy Father's Day today. And I want to kind of focus our attention a little bit on especially fathers, but even our homes in general. And so Colossians chapter 3. Colossians chapter 3 is our passage this morning. Verse number 18 is where we'll begin. Colossians chapter 3 and verse number 18. Wives, submit yourselves unto your own husbands as it is fit in the Lord. Husbands, love your wives, and be not bitter against them. Children, obey your parents in all things, for this is well-pleasing unto the Lord. Fathers, provoke not your children to anger, lest they be discouraged. Just those few verses there, 4 verses that kind of direct our minds to this issue of our homes and our families and certainly our fathers. That's part of what's included here. But I want us to think about the need for healthy homes this morning. Healthy homes. Really, history gives us all sorts of examples of various families. You might say the family life in general to observe and maybe sometimes critique a little bit. In other cases, maybe even to imitate. And certainly that is the way our home should be, is something that others could imitate. For our children, very likely will. At least to some degree. They will probably imitate to a large degree what our home was like, what their home was like growing up. And certainly I know poems and cards may sound like every father is a saint. But obviously that's just not true. And of course, neither is it true, just to be fair here, neither is it true that every saintly father was a good father as far as their children are concerned. And there are some examples like that in history, that they were so focused on ministry and various other things, and we would, from whatever we would know of, we would say, well, they were a good, godly man, but obviously I believe that there's an issue of godliness that needs to impact our families at home. And so without casting dispersion necessarily on a person's character, still there are some that just simply were unwise, at least, in the way they've handled their families. And I suppose there's a variety of reasons why that may happen, but we need to be very careful that we properly value our family, for that's really one of the, especially if you consider the wife included there, that is our biggest obligation, is that we are the husband and father, the head of the home, the example that we need to be, so that our family is I guess probably the best word to use there is led toward heaven. Not pushed, not driven, but led toward heaven. And really, home life is all about relationships. Happy homes depend on good relationships and healthy relationships among those who live there, whether it's husband and wife, whether it's parent and child, even the children amongst themselves. And really, if your home is not happy, it probably relates pretty directly to the health of your relationship with one another, of those that you live with. And so we need to recognize, even here on this Father's Day, how much we play a part in that. And of course, again, we're focused a lot on fathers, and rightly so on a day like this, but also included there is the wife toward the husband, the father, the children toward the father. So it works really the whole way around. And I believe God wants us to have a happy home. He created the home to be a healthy haven, and we should be able to support one another and help one another. And of course, God gives us these instructions even here in our passage this morning to help us to have a happy home. And it'd be wise for us to follow these instructions. This is what God intended. And they may sometimes seem out of date. I know some people, they may not like this kind of a message. They don't maybe even like this kind of a passage in the Bible. But let's look at these relationships here this morning, particularly for fathers, but really as a healthy home in general. The first thing we would notice here is that we need to notice the father as the head of the home. The father is the head of the home. Now, maybe in some ways that might seem off track for a Father's Day message, for it's not, I guess, it applies to the children, but it also even is right here as the wife. Wives, submit yourselves unto your own husbands, as it is fit in the Lord. And then, of course, children, obey your parents. And so God's intention is father and mother and then children. And we need to recognize all of that, of course, is under God, who is the true head. But God intended for this to be the case. And really, I know that may be out of touch with society these days, and maybe to a large degree, fathers, even in many cases, sometimes even children's books, the father might be the doofus. He might be the one that doesn't know what he's doing, and the mother or the children have to kind of coach him along to help him make it through life. That is not appropriate. That is not scriptural. God's intention is for the father to be the head of the home, and He's placed the man as the authority. And really, that ought to give the wife, and the children a sense of relief and comfort and security. It's not chauvinism. It's not to say that the man is the dictator and whatever I say goes in a harsh way. That's not the way even God would deal with us. But He gently leads, and we are to be that example of godliness even in our home and in our leadership. It's not about favoritism either. And it's not just that, the man or the sons are the only ones that are worth anything. No, this is something that God has ordained for us to properly love one another. We're going to get to that in just a little bit. It's just simply a matter that God saw that the roles in this way are appropriate and right and good. That's best. And so really one of the best Father's Day gifts from a wife would be the proper respect and submission. And really, I believe that the overall health of the home hinges on the right respect for dad by wife and children. And that needs to be upheld. I know that may not be popular anymore. I don't just mean in the general society necessarily or just Hollywood, although that's true too. And I mentioned even children's books or whatever. But really, it seems sometimes like even holiness women have the idea, well, I'll respect my husband as long as I agree with him. If I don't agree, then I'm not doing it that way. I don't see it that way. I have a right to make my choice. And there's a variety of things of that sort, and we need to be very careful that this is not just submission whenever I think I want to, when I feel like it. That's not the way it is toward God, and that's really not the way it should be in our homes from children or even the wife to the husband. And obviously, that attitude undermines the role that God has designed for the home, for the family. So yes, first of all, the father is to be the head of the home, and that's important. Let's notice also the father as a husband. And some might think, we've already talked about that because, he's to be respected. No. Just hold on a moment. What else did Paul say here about husbands? He said, husbands, love your wives and be not bitter against them. Another place he also says that husbands are to love their wives as Christ loved the church and gave himself for it. And so, sometimes the father may say, you need to respect me. You need to honor me. I'm the head of the home. And it could even be toward the wife. Although I don't recommend that you have that attitude because that's not scriptural. But when we start looking at it that way, we may think that, they have to respect me. I really don't have that much. Obviously, I love my family, and so that's good enough. No, we need to recognize that there is this sacrificial love. And the father as a husband needs to properly love and respect and cherish his family. In fact, if you go back to Ephesians, I think it's chapter 6, maybe that refers to it, says that you'll find that guideline that I've just mentioned to you, where the husband is to love his wife as Christ loved the church. So go back and read it. It's there. You can find that pattern, and of course we know that's what Jesus gave us. And as husbands, as fathers, we are to be modeling Christ to our families. And so when you're harsh toward them, or when you are just the dictator, waving the whip or whatever else, and you just do what I say because I said so, that's not Christ-like, and that's not what God had ordained for the father as a husband, and to work together in the home. Obviously, that's a high standard when we start putting Christ there as our example, but it is our duty as husbands And if you're going to start talking about relationships in the home, one of the key things is husbands, you better love your wives, your wife, each husband with one wife. But you need to love them. You need to treat them with respect and honor. I've heard somewhere in the distant past, I guess, that the best thing a father can do for his children is to love their mother. And really that goes a long way in building up the proper atmosphere in our homes. Now, I know we have so much here, maybe I could get off on a rabbit trail, but it's so easy for our children to suffer because our homes are not the loving haven. That was the word I used earlier. We'll use that one again. A haven, a place of comfort and respect and proper attitudes. And so many of our young people, just this past week, we were with a couple hundred young people plus. And how many of those would have come from dysfunctional homes? The dad may be there, but he's not really much of a dad. And he certainly doesn't love his wife like Christ loved the church. And it's just turmoil and heart. Really, that's a key issue in our young people, understanding what God is like, understanding who He is. God help us here. We need to remember that a broken relationship between spouses does not leave the children without wounds and hurts and scars. They have them. And sometimes, even though they may be masked by a smile, or perhaps even what looks like a pretty sincere heart, it doesn't mean they've been unscathed. It doesn't mean that they haven't been affected. Perhaps these first 2 points here, the father as the head of the home and as a husband, may be one of the reasons, I don't want to be too hard on people, but maybe one of the reasons why we seem to lose far too many of our young people. God help us to have the proper relationship in the home. Then let's go a little bit further. The father as a hero. Years ago, I read an article, I don't even know where it came from now, but it kind of compared or contrasted the lives of criminals and presidents and kind of that home life issue. And it was kind of curious to read, really, that numbers of our country's presidents actually had suffered from somewhat of an absent father as well. I don't know what that's supposed to say exactly, but they sort of lacked a father figure in the home. But the same was true for many criminals. Those who were in the justice system, they, in many cases, they could point back to a dysfunctional home life. Now, there was a little bit of a difference there. For the presidents, many of those fathers were, they may have been absent, but they were out doing heroic deeds. I'm not necessarily justifying all of that. I'm just saying that's why they did it. They weren't just being a deadbeat, as many of the criminals' dads may have been. But really, to me, the greatest hero for our children is the man who decides purposely, on purpose, I choose to do the right thing when I don't feel like it, when it's not easy to do, when the world around me tries to force me into other things. I'm going to do the right thing. And I'm going to be accessible. I'm going to be godly in our home. I'm going to be involved in their lives. Let me just say it to you this way. You don't have to be a millionaire. You just have to be a man. You have to really step up and be a man. If you want to be a hero, it may not even be some dashing story of success or heroic deed that you did where you pulled somebody from a burning building or whatever else. It may just simply be you were there, you led your family in the things of God, and they chose to go with God because they saw Him in you. You don't have to be a millionaire. You just have to be a man of God. Father as a hero. And then lastly, I want to touch on just a few issues here. Because in Paul here to the Colossian church, he also touched on, in verse number 21, fathers, provoke not your children to anger, lest they be discouraged. And so I want to just touch briefly before we bring it to a close today. I want to mention this issue of a father as a hindrance. Now, I know that might be a little bit of a downer because, we've talked about how he's supposed to be the head of the home and he's supposed to be the husband, the one who cares for his wife and children. He's supposed to be a hero. Great things. but he also can be a hindrance. And I just want to touch on this a little bit. I know maybe I should have just dealt with this first and then ended on a high note, but I just want to remind you, dads, you can be a hindrance to your children, both socially and spiritually, if you don't treat them with love and respect. Believe me, I understand. We need to be correcting them, but we better be careful that we don't provoke our children to anger, lest they be discouraged. We ought to avoid severity, harshness, just always being the disciplinarian. Sure, I understand. Sometimes they need discipline. But don't let them always see you as the man who can never be satisfied. The one who is always picking, always having a burr under the saddle, so to speak. There's always something wrong. And sometimes fathers can be a hindrance. Again, there is place for correction. But that is not to say that carnality and contempt is acceptable. We must treat our children with love. You take a look at the bulletin this morning. Take a look at the story there in the back. The judge sees this boy he knew, and then asking him a little bit of kind of maybe trying to stir him to think a little bit about how much he must be hurting his father. He asked him about his memories of his dad and found out that what he remembered was a dad who wasn't involved. He was always too busy writing his book. He never had time to take for him. And now that boy, even from a well-known lawyer who had written the sort of the exhaustive study for other people to read, he had lost his own son. I think the statement there says something about, alas, he finished the book, but he lost his boy, something like that. And so this morning I want us to recognize, fathers, we have a job to do. We will answer for our stewardship as it relates to our children. Sometimes we have that idea that means I have to, just handle the whip. I have to have the rod. I have to make sure I beat them into subjection. I have to make sure that I don't let them do anything. Well, yeah. Maybe it's just that you simply have to lead with love. You have to show them what it means to love your family. We may well hinder our children's proper view of God if we represent Him in a hurtful way. If they're looking at you as their example of God, do you think they want to serve Him? Now, I understand. We see ourselves differently than everybody else sees us. I do understand that. And where different times I might say, I'm just a teddy bear, but I may not be viewed that way by some others. That may be how I see myself, but we need to just back up a little bit and say, Lord, is there any way, however I'm responding here, even when something really hits hard, am I responding with love? Am I responding with respect and concern and compassion? Am I showing forth Christ in the way I live? There's several that I want to give to you just real quickly here. Several ways we might be able to be a hindrance. And we need to guard against them. The first one is what I've called hypocrisy, or maybe we could say inconsistency. You see, we wouldn't want to call ourselves hypocrites, of course. But are there areas in our lives where we say, this is the way it is, but then we fudge over here? Can our families look at us and they see we're always the same? We are steady. We say this is what we're going to do, and this is what we do. We say we're not going to do that, and that's exactly the way it turns out. There's been a variety of ways. Sometimes things have concerned me because we make this statement, this is the way this is our policy, but then you find out, wait a minute, that's not your policy. Whenever you want to do something, you'll do it. You might say over here, because it's not that important, you say, well, that's our policy, that's the way we're doing it. But then selfishly, we go ahead and do something kind of inconsistent. I don't want to get too terribly, specific here on some areas, but we've got to be so careful that we are consistent. I saw that, here's one I will get specific on. I saw that sometimes even in the issue of our, all the COVID response. And I can't go to church, but I will go over here. I'll be in the store. I'll go ahead and shop, and I'll do this and that. And sometimes it may be that our children are looking at us. That's just one example, and it was a hot button issue for a while. But are there issues in our lives where that's what happens? And we say this is where we stand. This is what our policy is, and then we don't live by it. God help us. Sometimes our hypocrisy, our kids can see through it. They can see the hypocrisy sometimes. They can see the inconsistencies. And if we don't want to be a hindrance to our kids and make them question and scratch their head, and I don't understand this. Sometimes maybe even in the area of truth. I heard what they just said, and I know it's not right. That's not accurate. Our children are watching us. We better be careful. Not only hypocrisy and consistency, that kind of thing, but also harshness. I believe that's part of what the principle here is that Paul's giving. Fathers, provoke not your children to anger. There's another place as well. He refers to it as wrath. But right here, he especially says, lest they be discouraged. Are you harsh with them? Or do you appeal to them? Do you lead them? Is it about honey? That's sweet and draws them in. The old saying, you can attract more flies with honey than you can with vinegar, or something to that effect. And sometimes maybe our response to our families may be a vinegar and harshness. You'll do it because I said so. Maybe we ought to be modeling Jesus. There's no maybe about it. That's just the way it ought to be. We need to be modeling Jesus to them. Not harsh, but loving. Sometimes that harshness can be a hindrance. And sometimes we may not even realize. There may be stories kind of going around. People know. Oh, yeah, they were. I don't know how they could even say it that way. Or I don't know. I heard the way they were talking to their kids, and it just... Let me just ask it to you this way. And of course, you don't have to respond. But let me just ask you. If someone important to you was a fly on the wall in your home, would they admire your parenting, or would they say there'd be no wonder if those kids don't go with God? Pretty important question. The last one I've noticed with you as well, a third H here, is half-heartedness, particularly in time and attention. And again, that goes back, I mentioned the story in the bulletin today. And we can get so distracted. We're doing this and doing that. We say we love our families, but do we really? Do we give them the time they deserve? Or are we just sort of half-hearted toward our family? Again, let me just remind you, we are stewards of our children. They were given to us as a gift. And we need to be sure we are giving them back to God and make sure that we are giving them the attention, the care that they deserve, modeling Christ to our family. Sometimes we can be a hindrance because we're only half-heartedly there. Our mind's always on something else. Oh, don't disturb me. Don't bother me right now. I'm doing this or that. That's a pretty high standard for all of us. But God help us not to be a hindrance, provoking our children to anger. Well, being a father isn't particularly unusual. It's been that way for generations, obviously, centuries, millennia. But these days, maybe being a dad is a little unusual. A really involved dad. To raise healthy and holy children, we need to make our relationships happy. We need to make them a priority. We need to spend time on them. And though it may be a bit unpopular sometimes, we need fathers that will take responsibility as the head of the home, lead their families in the right way. Be a hero to your wife and to your children. It's what God intended. We need to show our children what it's like to be Christ-like, to be godly. By our own life, kind of giving them a little glimpse of what it's like to serve God. We need healthy homes. Fathers, you have a mammoth task. I'm not meaning to just beat you up, but I want us to recognize how important this is for us to be the godly man He requires.